The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual participants and do not necessarily reflect the official position of the host, other guests, or any affiliated entities. Each participant is responsible for their own statements and opinions. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Hola, mi enchada! Welcome back for another episode of High Trust, Low Context, episode 15, Vince McManhood. And joining me tonight is an old friend back from the home country of Canada, my good buddy, Mr. Black. Welcome to the show. Hey,
Good
man,
day.
good to have you.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, man. So Mr. Black and I go way back. We've had lots of great deep discussions, and I thought he'd be a really good guy to bring in for this topic. As if you've been living under a rock, you probably haven't seen anything with regards to Mr. Vince McMahon, the godfather of pro wrestling. Although he doesn't like the word pro wrestling, he likes to use the term sports entertainment. Which is appalling to me. But he's been in the news. He's been in the news for quite a while. There's been a lot of allegations levied against him for quite a while now. There's been a lot in the wrestling world. If somebody gives an honest opinion on something, they call it a shoot. So in the wrestling world, we have two words. We don't say something is real or fake. We say if something is a work or a shoot. So a work is something that's fake. It's something you do in the job. So for example, in the video I just played, there were a lot of incidences of Vince McMahon booking himself as quite the degenerate that he is, making out with different female talent in front of his wife even. And, he books himself as an evil, maniacal boss. And in a lot of times there's a work shoot element in it. The lines kind of blur a bit, like my background right here. And so in this regard, I've been going back through a lot of shoot interviews with different people who have worked with Vince McMahon. And I guess maybe I'll quickly breeze over some of the allegations that have come to light. This started coming in late last year, and the allegations were that Vince had an employee that he was basically keeping as a personal slave, as a bit of a sex slave for himself. And so this employee alleged that Vince took her in a vulnerable spot, put her into a fake position. I think they gave her some BS title, something like administrative consultant or something like that, or some administrative coordinator or something like that. And essentially what he would do is he would tie her employment to her servicing him personally, and not just him. The allegations get worse. So he would share her with other employees, other executives in the company, and quite the disgusting stuff was alleged. I mean, we're talking about defecation in her hair. We're talking about her being forced to make videos with him and him passing them around to other people. But also, I mean, probably the most serious of them all is basically him locking the door and forcing her to perform with him and another executive. Now, that other executive is a guy by the name of John Laurinaitis, another married man, another powerful man. And, as part of her job description, she had to go to his hotel and service him as quote unquote breakfast before he would go to work. And he is now claiming that he too is a victim. And he's like, the truth will come out. And if you see through it, I mean, I was being forced to do things I didn't want to do as well. This has also come back. So she did not name this particular person, but she gave enough details for us to pretty much 100% confirm that there's a big name in wrestling and a big name in MMA, Brock Lesnar. And so she said a returning WWE superstar who was a former UFC champion. Look, it's not Phil Brooks. It's not CM Punk. There's only one, and it has to be Brock Lesnar, and the timing lined up. And basically, Vince used her as a bargaining chip to get him to re-sign. So as part of him coming back, he would get access to this woman whose name is Janelle Grant. And so, you're reading these details, and also, for example, when I was coming back to the Catholic Church, I used to do a lot of volunteering at the church. I helped out a lot with the catechism of the kids coming up. So kids who were getting ready for First Communion, kids who were getting ready for confirmation. And as part of it, I had to go through a pretty lengthy amount of training to deal with basically with child abuse, groomers, how to spot a groomer, how to spot an abuser, how to do your job in a safe way that's safe for the families and safe for yourself against accusations. And when I'm reading through this document, it was almost like the textbook of this program I had to take on, how an abuser will track down a potential victim. So she was just coming out of a situation where her parents had just passed away. She had very little job experience. I think she was 21 or 24 at the time. And in the costs of, in the US, sometimes with the healthcare system there were a lot of costs. So basically, their house had to be sold. Everything had to be sold. They were basically, in post-mortem, they were bankrupt. And so she was left with nothing. So this lady is desperate, and she gets introduced to Vince McMahon, who takes her under his wing and basically proceeds to groom her into this position because she's in a position of need. And so I wanted to bring Mr. Black on because, we had a lot of different topics that we had discussed possibly bringing in. And I said, this one's a little bit timely. And I know this wasn't on our list, but I think it's something we can absolutely talk about. And the topic of Vince McManhood, I don't want to just talk about Vince McMahon because I think there's enough info out there on that. But I really wanted to talk about this type of personality, this type of power tripping that can go on. Why women do this too, but why men in positions of power abuse such power and go for more. I mean, we're talking about a man worth over $1 billion, multi-billionaire. He's got enough money. He's got enough freedom. He's got a wife. He's got kids. He's got a wife with political aspirations. I believe Linda McMahon once ran for a U.S. senator. And, for a guy like myself and a guy like yourself, we're married men, happily married men. We're fathers. We are members of our community. And we try to raise our kids right. And we try to honor our marriages and honor our wives. And, you see something like this. And like, for example, what was your reaction when you saw all this stuff coming out about Vince McMahon?
Honestly, in a lot of ways, I wasn't surprised. I've never been like a huge fan, but, growing up, we used to watch a lot of the events, WWF and all that. And as I grew up as a teenager and especially in the 90s, the content became more and more, Jerry Springer,
Yeah. He cited them specifically as an influence. Yeah. Jerry Springer, South Park.
So he has all this soap opera stuff, but some of it was very, crude white trash. It was, basically the morality was out the window. It was all about just sensationalism. And of course, wrestling is about sensationalism, but now you bring in this other element, right? With, the sex, drugs, the betrayals, the, no moral standards. So for a guy to build a business on that, there's always like a deeper level to that. They only show like an iceberg. People only show sort of how much vice they have in their life. And if they're showing that much on the surface, how much has to be underneath?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like Vince had total control of the company, and no story that ended up on the television screen got there without his approval. And so, I get it. Like I've owned a wrestling company. I've booked myself. I play a character that is much like the evil Mr. McMahon character that he portrayed on TV. And I was always told, when you're putting together a gimmick, that's what we call your character. That's what you would call your storyline, your gimmick. When I put a gimmick together, what I was always told is the best gimmicks are taking you and a particular aspect of your personality and cranking it to 11. And, so if I'm watching that, like, so, my character, Don Chaco, is a wealthy expat who wants to blend in with the Paraguayan culture. And I come by it easily because compared to a lot of the people that I'm near, I'm wealthy. But I have a conscience. So I take myself and I erase the conscience and I substitute it in with a neediness and a narcissism that I don't have, but I have encountered with other people. So you could say that maybe Vince McMahon was portraying himself in the most evil way he could for himself. And I don't really need to talk too much about the Mr. McMahon character versus Vince McMahon. They're two completely different entities. However, this is a man who booked himself to make out with Trish Stratus in front of his comatose wife in the storyline. He covered her in slop, forced her to bark like a dog. He had many of his wrestlers and talent join what was called the Kiss My Ass Club, where he would literally humiliate them in the ring by pulling his pants down and having him kiss his bare ass. We watched him. Actually, there was his own daughter, Stephanie McMahon, was pregnant in real life. And you can find this where she admits that when she was pregnant, so in a lot of like shows, you have to like work in a pregnancy. So in certain like sitcoms and stuff, they either acknowledge the pregnancy and have it be a part of the show, or they will hide it behind things, put different types of clothing on, do all kinds of stuff to do what they can with it. Vince's golden idea was that they were going to have Stephanie come on and reveal that he was the father. Disgusting. And I mean, I get he's going for shock content, but that's pretty far. So she's like, I'm not doing that. I'm absolutely not doing that. It's disgusting. I'm not going to do that. And so his first answer afterwards, okay, we'll make Shane your brother the father. And she's like, no, that's just as bad or worse. Yeah. So it really tells you kind of a little bit more about where his head is. And this is a guy who's known for, potty humor. He's a very abnormal person. So, I mean, I was digging into the man and trying to find certain things. I found interviews he did with Playboy magazine, interviews he's done with ESPN, and clearly he did not have a good childhood. He had his father, Vince McMahon Sr., was the original owner of what at that time was called the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, the WWF. And his father was absentee. So he basically grew up with his mother in a trailer park. And he had major self-confidence issues. He had several, he had an evil stepfather. He claimed he was sexually abused by his mother. He was physically abused by his father. He was molested by his older cousin. He had a very warped upbringing, just a very warped upbringing. And, you know, I've worked in the wrestling business enough to know that most wrestlers, and this isn't a hyperbole, most wrestlers come from a pretty bad background. Most of them come from broken homes. So they call baby faces and heels. So baby faces are the good guys, heels are the bad guys. One of the things that I did learn from when I would be backstage is it typically was the reverse in the backstage. So a lot of the baby faces in the ring were more heels in the backstage, and the heels backstage took themselves less seriously. And they were actually, you know, like heels out front, they did a great job of making people hate them, but backstage, they're usually pretty good guys and they're there for the business. And so with Vince McMahon, you know, he got to a certain point, he wanted to be like his dad, and he got himself into the business. And it's like being with a traveling circus. You're with a freak show. You're not with the normal people in the world. And so this is something that we had to kind of parse through. How do you create a monster like Vince McMahon? And I think in a lot of ways starts in childhood, and it starts with a lack of fatherhood. And so if you actually go into, there's a lot of studies about, for example, prisoners in the prison system. It's ridiculous how many more, like it's in the 90s percentage that come from broken homes or had no father. Fatherlessness is a deep destructive tool of the enemy to make us all into, you know, basically slaves to our vices. And that's what happened to him. And so you've got this man who's billions of dollars. He's got power. And I was saying this to my wife too. I was like, you know, like if you got $1 billion, is the first thing you want to do is to start running around for tail? Or is it, you know, like doing something good and taking some vacations and maybe helping your community and, you know, like creating jobs for people and other opportunities? I mean, that's where my head goes, but I mean, it's easy to say because I don't have that situation. But in comparison, when I'm here in Paraguay, you know, the average person here, so the minimum wage, the minimum monthly wage, and not everybody's making the minimum monthly wage, but the minimum monthly wage is about 2.5 million guaranis. So in Canadian dollars, it's about $500 a month. And in US dollars, about $350 a month, right? So that's what people are living off of. So if you're making, let's say $3,000 a month or $5,000 a month, you're making 10 times what people are making in the community. So there is that gap. And so it's not too far-fetched to say, it's a lot easier to be in the top one, in the 1% in Paraguay than it is in Canada or the United States. But that purchasing power, that ability to kind of grease the wheels, get things going, you have a lot more of that here. And so I'm not completely far off. I'm not completely far off to say there's better things you can do with your time, and there's better things you can do with your money. But Vince McMahon clearly is not a man of faith. He has booked himself in the past to have matches against God, where he mocked God. He had him and his son booked in a tag team match against Shawn Michaels, who was a born-again Christian, and his tag team partner was God. So basically Shawn Michaels comes to the ring, and then they have a spotlight that just kind of tracked all the way to the ring as if God was his tag team partner. The whole thing was a mockery, and Shane won. Shane and Vince won. So he booked himself to beat God. And then he also, like in the promos leading up to that, I don't know what church allowed him in, but he and his son went into a church and they cut a whole bunch of skits in the church, including where he mocked Triple H, who does a thing where he drinks a bunch of water and then he spits it in the air. And so he goes, "Who am I?" And he takes the holy water font, pours it into his mouth, and spits it into the air. So we're not talking about a really good person here. Clearly there's some major flaws.
Yeah.
But he's not. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and with performance, like, you know, you can have villains in performance and perform them morally. You can portray really evil actions. But the really big distinction, and Father Ripperger makes this distinction quite well. And basically what it is if you're not committing a sin in the act of portraying an evil action, so you can portray sin without sinning, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can play your character as this narcissistic guy, you know, and put on an act and show, you know, yourself as a bad guy and not sin. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're committing blasphemous acts or sexual acts on camera as part of the act, while doing that, you're also sinning.
Yes.
And so that distinction needs to be very clear. If you don't have that, you know, that boundary in yourself to understand the difference, if you just see it as all the same, it's really a dangerous place to be because you don't have a moral sense to guide you.
Well, there's an example of that. There's a show, I believe it's called Yellowstone, starring Kevin Costner, and there was an actor on there who refused to make out with another woman because he felt like it wasn't appropriate with it. You know, he's a married man and he just didn't want to do it. So he's pretty much been blackballed in Hollywood since. And I mean, like, you have some creative control. You can do certain things, and I get it. He's portraying a sleazeball, and he's the evil boss. On this show, when I have guests on, I usually tell them ahead of time. I say, listen, you know, I don't mind if you drop an F-bomb. If it just comes out, it's fine. If you say the S word, fine. But please don't use any GDs or JCs. I will edit it out of the show and I won't invite you back on. And, so for example, as Don Chaco, I had a storyline where my job was to take one of my guys who was on my bad guy team, on my heel team, and turn him babyface. So one of the ways that you turn a heel babyface is to have another heel like really wrong him, and then have him turn in the middle of the ring. I mean, again, it's like the quintessential example is Darth Vader on the Emperor at the end of Return of the Jedi. So in this case, I was up with the bookers that I had, the showrunners that I had for my show. They came to me and they're okay. We're going to turn Bloss, this character, we're going to turn him babyface. I said, great. And you're going to do it. Fantastic. I can do a great job of that. And we had it where basically we had a tournament, came to the end of the tournament. And at the end of the tournament, it was basically my two guys that were the two finalists. So I was like, look, I won already. I mean, it's over. I mean, it's mine. So I had an American and a Paraguayan, and to piss off the Paraguayan crowd, I told the Paraguayan, okay, now I want you to lay down and take the pin, right? And he's not going to do it. And I was like, what do you mean you're not going to do it? Like you throw yourself to the ground. That's what you're going to do. And he wasn't going to do it. No. And the crowd's getting behind him like, no, turn it down, turn it down. And they had it originally written that the go home line on it was, I was going to say, you're nothing but a stupid Paraguayan. And I said, no, I'm not going to say that line. And they said, why not? I mean, that's going to get you heat. And I said, I have many reasons for not saying you're nothing but a stupid Paraguayan. First of all, I live in Paraguay and I live amongst Paraguayans. And also, we are going to try and export the show, which we did export the show to other countries. And some of those other countries might think Paraguayans are dumb. And so that line's not going to resonate with them the way that it would for the local crowd. And I said, look, but the thing that will piss off everybody is if I just say you're my employee and you're nothing but a stupid employee. And then they're like, okay, great. And I used it and it worked. And it got everybody, like, the reaction was just as good. And, and And if you look at the past, like when the Mr. McMahon character was the top heel in the company, the top babyface was Stone Cold Steve Austin. And everybody really liked Stone Cold because he was a guy who told his boss to shove it. Yeah. And so we were essentially recreating that same vibe. But the thing is that Vince McMahon had, with like Trish Stratus, like as I showed in the video package before, he's making out literally in front of his wife, who's pretending to be comatose. And I mean, they were going to town. Like they were going to town. You could, in theory, going back to what Father Ripperger said, you can do a lot of that stuff innuendo. You can do a lot of that stuff through suggestion. You could do a lot of that stuff off camera. And we saw an example of that. Like she's coming out of his office, her hair's all messed up, she's a little bit sweaty. Okay, message received.
Yeah.
But he's booking himself, and multiple times, over and over and over again. You get a new girl who comes into the show, and the first thing they do with Tori Wilson is how to make out with Vince McMahon to get the job. And so, there is a blurring of the lines when we see this case right now. So this is a man who already was worth $1 billion. He could have retired. The guy's pressing 80. I think he might already be 80. So he doesn't need to do this. This is just pride. This is just pride at this point. He needs to keep that control. He needs to have that power. And if you look at the way that he treats people, he's fired people for being injured doing their job on his show. I don't even think they had healthcare coverage until like 2019, maybe 2021. And that was only after John Oliver shamed him on his show on HBO. So, and I mean, I'm not a big fan of John Oliver, but I mean, at least he got something done there. And, you look at it and you go, man, this is a publicly traded company. And this man has multiple NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, with multiple people. And that's another thing that I see a lot of these days, is this idea that somehow you can get somebody to sign an NDA and you can do anything you want to them because they can't tell anybody. And he got her to sign this NDA, and the NDA attached to it was supposed to be a payout of $3 million. And yet somehow he talked her into saying, yeah, it's not going to be one payout. We'll do it in installments. And he only paid $1 million, and then he stiffed her on the rest. And it was $1 million that was out of the company's coffers, which again is a misappropriation of funds. This is a publicly traded company. And yet he's using this money to pay for his sex slave. And that's the thing that I look at and I go, man, oh man, like this isn't your regular pedestrian, accusation. This one's pretty darn serious. And I really hope he gets prison time for it. Although I'm not holding my breath, because I haven't seen a lot of that kind of justice go on, especially for billionaires. You don't see a lot of billionaires in prison, and this probably won't happen. But it's not new. This isn't a new thing. I brought up to you before we got on the show that there's stories as old as time here for these powerful men abusing their power. I mean, even in the Bible, we look at, like, I look at King David. So King David, who for the most part was a great man, loved by God, and he fell into adultery. He fell into his lusts. He saw Bathsheba, and he saw her bathing, and then he basically needed to have her, and then he worked out a plan to off her husband. I mean, this isn't just like a one-off thing, like the difference between a venial sin and a mortal sin is, you got to have the will to do it. You got to know it's evil, and you got to do it anyway. And it's got to be grave. And this one fell into a absolute mortal sin because he knew he'd done his evil, and he did everything he could to cover it up. And that's what NDAs a lot of times show up. Like, I've signed NDAs before. Because I've got, publicly traded companies as my clients, and I get information before it goes to the market. And so I have to sign on these things, because otherwise, I mean, there's always that looming threat of an insider trading. I'm not going to do it, but I mean, I completely understand why they would have me sign it, but I wouldn't sign it if all of a sudden it was like terms of my employment. like that. I'm not going to say anything that I saw here. It's like, if you want me to sign this, then this is not the organization I want to be with. And, I don't think King David had Bathsheba sign an NDA, but like it got worse with his son. So, let's talk a little bit about what happened with King Solomon. This is a man who God gave a very gracious gift to. I mean, he basically said to him, you can have anything. And he says, I want to be the wisest person on earth. And he was. And he was. Like, Solomon was like beyond intelligent. And you could see it in his writings. But even then, even with infinite wisdom, you still can fall for your vices. And E. Michael Jones has brought up many times. He said that he quotes somebody with this, but I think it's St. Augustine. Might be St. Augustine. He says like a man is a slave to his sin. A man is a slave to his vices. And so we see this all the time. I mean, like one of the biggest sins that if you ask a priest today, what is the thing that they hear the most? It's pornography. It's pornography and pollution. And so, this is a scourge. It's absolutely a plague in our society. And if you look at the texts that Vince McMahon wrote to this woman, which are provable. I mean, those are that text messages are extremely easy to prove. So it's not like she just crafted these things, right? That's an easy piece of evidence to prove. So he said them. And I mean, this is a man who is clearly influenced by pornography, clearly influenced by his degeneracy. And, it's clouding him. He's making terrible decisions, and he's going to lose everything because of it. And you wanted to bring up too. You wanted to bring up basically about how power and riches tend to magnify our vices. Do you want to maybe kind of dip into that a little bit?
So, for us, if we fall into a vice, and I'm talking like people, without huge amounts of means, no legal team behind them or anything like that. We have to face the consequences pretty quickly, which helps in our decision-making process of how far we want to take our vices. Mm-hmm. However, you have power and riches. Now you have the ability to intimidate people into removing consequences. You have the ability to buy people off. So like when you look at an organization where the boss is basically completely corrupt, he doesn't get that way on his own. He gets that way through the tacit approval or silence of those around him, whether he's bought it from them or given them benefits to turn the other way or to join in with him.
Which we saw in this.
Yeah. And the failure of, in this situation, Vince McMahon, I mean, we can kind of extrapolate what's been happening with leadership around the world when, we all know enough about Epstein and how many people that touches to realize that this problem of corruption, of blackmailability, if you want to call it that, mm-hmm. is out there, where our godless leadership value people who are easy to blackmail. And easy people to blackmail are people with secrets, evil, dark secrets. Mm-hmm. So people are selling their souls basically for this power and wealth. So it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Mm-mm. There's a lot of people involved. So I guess, when I was thinking about what to talk about today, and we discussed it a bit, there's a failure as individuals who commit these acts. There's a failure of the surrounding community around them, of their families, a failure of churches, of bishops to speak out, and a failure on society for what we're willing to allow to become mainstream. Right? Like there used to be, E. Michael Jones, of course, and you talked about decency laws. Mm-hmm. Excuse me. And decency laws, of course, are there to sort of protect the dignity of the culture, to avoid people from being corrupted, to help protect children's innocence. Mm-hmm. However, the fact that I was watching some of this stuff on WWF at 12 through 18 years old, that has an effect on your formation, whether you like it or not. It has an effect on what moral standards you have, who you look up to, and the fact that I'm not saying to blame society for everything. I'm saying you need a holistic view of all the problems. And so when we're looking at a situation like this, I guess what I want to do is show, as an individual, how do you fall into this? As a society, how do you allow this? And then bring it all back to what can I do personally to make the situation better?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. Cause like my wife and I will go through and rewatch, shows or movies that we watched in our childhood. So, for example, E.T. was one of the most popular movies of all time and was a huge success when I was a kid. And I go back and I rewatch it, and I watched it with my kids thinking it was safe, and it's not. It's just not. Like, there's so many things wrong with ET that, like, I mean, there's a sequence. I already told my kids ahead of time not to listen to this show. But there's a sequence where like the older, I don't know if it's the younger brother or the older brother, calls one of the other one's penis breath. Yeah. Steven Spielberg thought that was a good idea to put that term into a movie for kids. What does that mean if a boy is saying that to another boy?
Yeah.
What is that? And so what's interesting too is we've got this weird dynamic. So we've got this weird dynamic where we had this push against slut shaming. And when I was growing up and I was a teenager, we definitely had virgin shaming. So, for example, you had the movie 40-Year-Old Virgin. You had American Pie. That was a big topic in teen movies. Was I can't graduate high school without having fornicated, and that was just commonplace. You had movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Did you ever see that one when you were growing up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fast Times at Ridgemont High completely normalizes abortion.
Yeah.
And so you got this time now where we're like, okay, we can't slut shame. We got to be sex positive. And so what they'll do is so for example, you've got like OnlyFans, which has tricked women into putting their body out online and putting their sexuality online. And that stuff's permanent. It's just permanent. You can't get rid of it. Somebody's got it. It's out there forever. Yeah. And you've now stained yourself for life. And yet you can't speak out against it. And yet at the same time, the same people who are championing that and championing legal prostitution, or championing like a Taylor Swift or somebody who dressed or Cardi B, or somebody who is singing about their sexuality being really, really immodest, really disgusting about it. You can't talk about that. But then you move over into like video games, and all of a sudden in video games, you can't hypersexualize women. So all of a sudden, all the animation's different, all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we can't find that happy medium. And it's like, I'm trying to teach my kids, like I live in a subtropical country. It's very hot. It's 41 degrees Celsius today here. It's hot. And in the hot climate, women, men, especially women, don't dress modestly. They are, dressing extremely scantily clad, and it's going to be around you. So if you're teaching your son, or if you're teaching your daughter, so first thing you tell your daughter is, don't dress like that, please. Like, we're going to, like, have some dignity. To your son, it's like, we talk about custody of the mind and custody of the eyes. And so, I have to, because you can't nerf the world. You can't turn everything off. You can't put horse blinders on your kids every time you're driving or doing anything in public. So you're going to need to teach your sons how to live in a world that's doing this without falling into falling into sin, falling into degeneracy. I mean, when I was growing up, there was a lot. So, for example, sex ed in schools, that was, if you didn't go and take sex ed in school, you were a loser, and you get shamed by everybody else. Like, oh, you're a Luddite, you're a total prude, or blah blah blah. So I was always into this in the sex ed classes, and they'd have question period or question box, and they would answer all these things. And the general message was, to be hypersexualized, that masturbation is health, not just even like okay, but it's like actually profitable for you. It's like a good idea. It's like it'll prevent cancer or do all this kind of stuff. It's just complete garbage science, complete garbage lies.
Well, and you look at the history of where that ideology behind sex ed came from. It goes all the way back to I forget the guy's name, German social scientist, but basically they ran experiments to see what they could do to kind of lower the modesty, especially of women, because it's harder to wear that down.
You keep talking, I'm going to remember his name.
And so what they found was, if they had one, how should we say, a looser female discussing publicly things about sex, that it would lower the modesty of the surrounding people. And further to that, Kinsey, that pervert scientist, they basically, he understood that if you discussed sex to children in a purely biological manner and exclude morality from it, that you could also wear down people's modesty and sense of what was appropriate. And for these people to do this, we have to understand there's an element of a psyop in all of this. And some people might think, oh, that's just conspiracy. But what they've done, and in one situation I've heard of in I believe it's in Palestine, they had a curfew. And what they would do is they would play inappropriate or pornographic videos on the airways.
That was in Ramal, and E. Michael Jones has talked about that, where basically they were forced to watch pornography on their television shows because they took over, the Israeli government took over their broadcast system, and basically the only thing that they could have on their television, and it was not just softcore, it was hardcore pornography being played 24/7 to demoralize them. And we hear that word demoralization. Break it down. To demoral, to take away your morals, and so that is it's clearly a weapon. It's clearly a weapon.
And what it does, especially to men, because we are very much more prone to this temptation, is if you're living a life addicted to pornography or addicted to anything, you're not going to rally up the virtue to stand up against evil. Say the evil of a dictatorship. You're not going to join with your fellow man or put that effort in. It empties you of your masculinity. And this brings us to one of the main reasons why a lot of these powerful or wealthy people fall into such corruption and depravity, is because wealth and power very easily make you effeminate. And I'm going to do another callback to Father Ripperger, because the technical definition of effeminate is preferring that which is pleasurable over that which is arduous and necessary. Basically meaning, if you have a choice between doing the hard work that you need to do to get some good for those around you and may involve self-sacrifice, you're going to instead choose chilling out, relaxing, or having a couple beer and taking it easy. That's like a very basic summary of what being an effeminate man is.
Well, by the way, going back to that German scientist, it was Wilhelm Reich. Wilhelm Reich was the name of that. Yeah. And then another one that you can look into is Magnus Hirschfeld. There's some pretty bad actors that got us through the 60s in the free love area. But yeah, going back to effeminacy, I mean, like looking at that from a fatherhood standpoint, I mean, look at how much fatherlessness we have. Look at how many abortions we have. These are people who, again, don't want to do which is better, but is hard or arduous. They see an abortion as an easy way out. They see, going out for a pack of cigarettes and never coming back as an easy way out. Deadbeat fathers and stuff like that. This is not something that was commonplace 150 years ago. This is recent, and this was by design. And going back to as well, when you're talking about dealing with children and getting them, hypersexualized early. I mean, there are literally in Europe right now where they will have in classrooms, in kindergartens, teaching the kids how to touch themselves and having a private room for them to go to quote unquote explore themselves. And this is so insidious. Yeah. And at the same time too, I mean, I like to bring up different rule books. Our society has different rule books. Find me that in the Bible. You will not find any of that stuff in the Bible, but I can find it for you in the Talmud. And I can find instances of these kind of things in, not exactly in the Quran, but in other Islamic writings, especially with Muhammad and his child bride. Yeah, Aisha. Yeah. And so, and one of the theories that is put forth by some of these people who follow the other rule book is that they have this wrong idea that somehow once a youth has engaged in sexual activity, they are instantly mature and become an adult. And that's why a lot of times you'll see some really degenerate stuff at like bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, and even still, even in Catholic countries, like, so for example, here, you have what's called the quinceañera, which is the 15th birthday party. And they spend more on quinceañeras than they do on weddings. Like, these things, people will mortgage houses just to pay for one day, for one birthday party, to keep up with the Joneses. And the original intent of the quinceañera was to present your daughter to the socialites and say, she's now open game, like she's now available to, get in there. And at the same time, I mean, like, if you look back in time, if you look into the 1800s, you had younger marriages. I think the average age of a married couple was 21, but that was the average. It wasn't uncommon to have 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds get married. And to be honest with you, if in that time period, if your life expectancy wasn't as long and there's a peak fertility and you're married, and I'd prefer that to teenage pregnancies and what we're dealing with in the now. And going back, the argument for sex ed all the time was, abstinence only education was supposedly, only going to lead to, just one second here. I got to get that shut off. That was somehow only going to, knock it off. Okay. I got to close whatever is on that is giving me those. You got to go away. Yeah, there we go. All right.
There we go.
So I got one of my viewers. There was you can comment on the screen. But yeah, this is the thing that I've noticed is that we're moving away from the purpose of marriage. We're like, there was this weird flip. So if you're interested in the Catholic teaching on marriage, I like to point people towards Casti Connubii, which I believe was written by Pope Pius XI. I think it was written by him. It might have been written by Pope Leo XIII, but I'm pretty sure it was, in that era. And it's very good teaching. It's very good teaching on the purpose of marriage. And so, the true purpose of marriage is to really boil it down to your job is to repopulate heaven with souls, right? Is the procreative, to raise a child and to raise them and form them so that they can be a part of the church, can be a part of the communion of the saints, and basically raise them to get to heaven. We're not doing that very good, right? We're just not doing that very well at all across society. I'm down here and divorce rate is huge. Divorce rate is off the chart. This is a Catholic country. People are divorced all over the place. And it's sad. It's sad because the thing is that we've lost our way. We've lost our compass. It might be hard to stay in a marriage that's miserable. It might be hard to be to be in a position of power like Vince McMahon, and people are throwing themselves at you, and just to say no. I mean, I've said this before. I actually think I'm not a big fan of the guy, but I admire Mike Pence's stance on being alone with a woman that isn't his wife. So he just won't do it. He won't do it. And it's a good idea, especially in this day and age. It's better than an NDA. And I don't like this idea that we just are supposed to accept that men of power or boys will be boys, or like, oh, you're just jealous because you can't get that kind of thing. It's like, it's not that hard. It's not. If it's somebody wanted to cheat, they can cheat, and we should be teaching people not to. I don't think that's a very controversial stance, and it's really weird that we're at that point. But going back to effeminacy goes back as well to even just the use of pornography. And if you look at pornography, I mean, trying to teach about why it's bad, it's like, well, you're taking something that is a unitive practice, a unitive engagement with your wife, and you're turning it back in on yourself. It's empty. It goes nowhere. And you are an adulterer when you're doing that. I know that people don't like hearing that, but you are. Jesus said straight up, if you look at another woman and lust after her, you've committed adultery. You just have. And we've lost that teaching.
Yeah, and it's pornography use is one of the most effeminate things you can do, in the sense that you're trying to take the pleasure with none of the hard work, responsibility, or duty that goes along with it.
Yeah.
I know I've talked to some people, and one explanation I've used for this is, you take any appetite, like say your appetite for eating, and you feed it nothing but sugar. There's going to be negative consequences, right? Your health's going to go down. You're going to get fat. You're going to have, low energy, blah, blah, blah. Pretty obvious. So then what's the purpose of eating? Well, of course, it's nutrition. So some food won't taste as good, or things like that, or you might have to put more work into preparing your food or finding healthy food. But if you put that hard work in, you get the better result of the purpose of what that appetite is drawing you to. The same thing with our, if you want to call it our sexual desire, is if you feed it nothing but sugar, you feed it nothing but perversity, it's going to have very negative consequences. And then if you take away the main purpose of it, which is obviously procreation, and you use it for something other than that, you're going to become a very unhealthy person. And because it's so closely united to who we are as a person, it's also very closely united to how we relate to our spouse. And it's also the power of our sexuality to join in the creation of a new human being with an eternal soul. The greater the power, the greater the good of something. If it's even twisted a little, the greater the evil that comes from it. So this
Absolutely.
Pandora's box of the sexual revolution that they opened, we're seeing the consequences everywhere, with rampant STDs, with abortions on demand, with marriages falling apart, families falling apart, entire generations being ruined of children who do not have the stability. I mean, this goes back to also what you're talking about with Vince's troubled childhood. There's a very good book I highly recommend called Architects of the Culture of Death. And each chapter is focused on a different atheistic thinker who's been highly influential on our society. Everyone from Nietzsche, Darwin, Schopenhauer. I forget a few of the topics, but basically they looked at how they were raised, what their philosophy was, how they lived their philosophy, and how they died. And what the common theme through the book was, these thinkers often had a terrible relationship with their father or an absent father, which led often to their atheism, because of course our first impression of God comes from our parents.
Absolutely.
And if the parent is absent, then it's hard to form an understanding of who God is. And
well,
then
you see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see that a lot in the culture now too. I mean, like if you look at sitcoms, cartoons, the attack on the commercials, the attack on fathers has been pretty standard for quite a while now.
Yeah.
And I've brought this up to other people. I mean, if you make dad an idiot in every show, in everything, you are basically what you're doing is you're devaluing fatherhood. And the father is also a representative of, because basically if you look at the hierarchy in the family, you've got God, dad, mom, kids, other people. And so, if you mock dad in every way, you're in a way mocking God, not directly, but you're indirectly planting the seeds for somebody. And this is why I have a problem with Santa Claus lore or Easter Bunny, those kind of things, because what it does is it basically is training kids to know your parents are liars and they're lying to you. And if they're lying to me about this, then are they lying to me about God? And it's these kind of seeds that get planted that can really do damage, over the long haul. It's a tough one because it's like, you want to do what you can, but we got a comment here. Paraguay also has the social debut in social clubs like Centenario and Sajonia, basically a mass quinceañera at 16. As the name suggests, it's basically putting the girls up for open season. I don't know how healthy that is. That's just, that's not very healthy. I mean,
no. But in line with that too, like you're left with, how do I put it? Like, it's why the fourth commandment is the fourth commandment. Honor thy father and mother. It is the bridge between the first three about God and then the other ones about how you relate to other people.
Yeah.
It is important. Yeah. And the first commandment, of course, is the most serious one to break. And as you go down, they become less serious. There's a hierarchy to the commandments. The bridge between God and your fellow man is honor thy father and mother.
And that's a tough one for people. Yeah. That's a really tough one for people. I've met a lot of people who were converting and they've had horrible childhoods, and and I feel for them. I thankfully did not have a horrible childhood. I had very supportive, loving parents. I still have loving and supporting parents, and it was a great example, and I try to pass it along to my kids. My wife had loving and supporting parents, and still has a loving and supporting father. So the thing is that, that is going to hopefully get passed along. But at the same time, if somebody can't come into the church, forgive, and this is a tough one, forgive your parents for the evils that they've done. Father, forgive me, for they know not what they do. There's a difference between, how do I put this? If you grew up in an abusive relationship, I mean, totally abusive from your parents, breaking all kinds of trusts and sinning immensely, if you can find a way to overcome and at least forgive them, and forgive them to the point where you don't hate them, that's key. You don't have to, once you're an adult, you don't have to have them integral in your life. You want to have that as a goal, but you don't have to. You're not obliged to if they're going to continue with abusive behavior. However, for a lot of people, that is a big stumbling rock, stumbling stone for them to get over. And for a lot of people, that's too much. That's just too much to overcome. And Father Ripperger's talked about that. He's dealt with people who were possessed, who were abused by their parents, who were Satanists. And it wasn't until he was able to get them to be able to forgive their parents for what they did that the possession ended. And to the point where this was a particular woman that she's like, I don't know how. And he instructed her, yeah, you're not capable of doing it, but you can only do it with Jesus Christ, with his help. Yeah. You can put that onto Jesus and be like, please help me with this situation. And so I look back and I've heard enough already. Stephanie, so the two prominent kids of the McMahon family are Shane McMahon and Stephanie McMahon. Shane McMahon has gone away and come back a few times, but what I've heard, and again, I'm not trying to columnize and I'm not trying to murmur, but I'm trying to tack this on to what the topic is that Shane stood up to his father in front, because he was in with the executives, in with the boards, and in with those kind of things, and he was basically being taught to do the game just like his dad. His dad really wanted him to be a degenerate just like him. And he stood up to his father and he denied it. He says, I'm not going to go like that at all. And he ended up leaving the job. I mean, talk about it. Like, you're the heir apparent. You're the one who stands to gain. You've got Vince Sr., Vince Jr., and then Shane. You're the next in line. You're Prince William. And he walked away and actually went as far away as he could. He went to China and worked in China to basically help them build the Netflix of China. But he did stand up to his father, allegedly, in front of all these other guys, saying, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be like you. And I'm not going to treat my wife the way you treated mom. Yeah. Stephanie McMahon, it was very high up in the organization. The allegations came in and she immediately resigned from her position. Again, heir apparent, was supposed to be the next in line because Shane was gone. And she said, I'm out. And then he was forced to resign. This was last year. He was forced to resign, left the company. Everybody celebrated. Ding dong, the witch is dead. And then because he was the largest shareholder in the company, weaseled his way back in, got himself back on the board, became the executive chairman again, and she left the job again. And then now that this has come out, he has resigned and she's been asked to come back. But what I'm on good authority to say is that it's been said that she has blocked him from the family. He's not to see his grandchildren, and he is not to take part. Like he's not involved anymore. She wants nothing to do with him. And I find that interesting. I had a friend of mine who was asking me, he's a recent convert, sadly not Catholic, but Christian convert coming in from atheism, from communist atheism. He came in from East Germany. And so he's coming in from communist atheism, and he has trouble with the Bible on certain parts. And I mean, the Bible's not easy. You need a Philip to explain it to you. That's what I always say to people. You're the Ethiopian. You need a Philip. And he was bringing up about, I want to say Sarah. Rebecca. Which one was the mom of Esau and Isaac? Was it Sarah or Rebecca?
You test me. I think it's Sarah. Yeah,
I think it's Sarah. So basically, there's not very many points of the Bible that encourage deception. And in the story of Isaac and his brother was supposed to be the heir apparent, although God had told them ahead of time that the younger born will be the one that gets the blessing and the older will serve the younger. And so earlier, Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of pottage of lentils to his brother. He shouldn't have done that, but he did it.
It's an effeminate choice.
A very effeminate choice. Yeah, he was hungry. And so he later, then there was a deception. I want to say it was Sarah. not Rebecca. But and it's like, yeah, he gets the blessing, and his line continues, and Esau has to serve him later on. And people go, but the mom like deceived, like she helped in the deception. And it's like, yeah, and she paid the price. Think about it. She didn't get to see her sons again, ever. Her sons went away, and she died without seeing them again. Didn't get to take part in it. Didn't get to be around her grandkids. And he ended up, like, the deceiver Isaac ended up having to go and serve this other father-in-law and marry the wrong woman and go through all this whole ordeal. So, I mean, he didn't get it easy either, so there was a punishment attached. And so I'm really hoping in the case of Vince McMahon, there is a punishment attached. I was talking about this with a friend, and he was saying, they'll just buy his shares from him and force him out of the company. I go, that's not a good enough punishment at all. If you buy the shares from him, he gets money. Right now, his money is tied up in shares. But if he gets, gets his shares force sold. So there's actually laws. There's actually laws in the SEC in place for situations like this, especially if he's using company funds to pay his own legal expenses that are caused by his own personal vices, so that they can actually shrink or delete his shares. I want him to have nothing. I want him to serve time in prison because what he did was criminal, allegedly. We'll see how it goes in the I hope it goes to court. I'm not sure if it will, but I hope it goes to court. But it comes back to, we're talking about rich and powerful people with their, influence and money, but blessed be the poor. And it makes you wonder sometimes if it is better to be poor, to have to struggle in life and to have to learn how to not be effeminate. You can't really be effeminate and poor. It doesn't really work so well. It gets worse for you. I mean, you can, but it's a one-way road to hell. You're going to have a real bad time. Did you want to flesh that out a little bit more about, the blessing of being poor?
Yeah. So when you're rich and wealthy, right? Like you can, like we said earlier, you can buy away your consequences, at least temporarily.
Temporally.
I mean, we're all,
yeah.
When we die, that's it. And
can't take it with you.
Yep. God reveals you as you are to yourself, and you will fully acknowledge and accept the judgment God gives you. There's no avoiding that.
Right.
But in this world, the rich and powerful, and it's very much like drug use, where you're trying to control artificially how you feel. Sure, you feel great, your life's falling apart. Do another line of coke, and all your problems disappear in your mind, and you feel like you can take on anything
for like 90 minutes.
Yeah, but it's completely distorted.
Yeah,
your view of reality. And so as things are crumbling, you're missing the feedback loop that God built into reality, where sin, the consequences to sin are always built into the sin.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't face those, now you don't have a feedback loop to try and correct your life.
Well, going back to even the pornography and masturbation aspect, right? I mean, you ask anybody who suffers from that vice, and it's like, yeah, is it a temporary pleasure, or is it permanent and lasting, and does it actually benefit you in the long run? No, everybody feels guilty and horrible and disgusting afterwards.
And the shame is part of the naturally built-in consequence to it.
Well, God's law is written on your heart, and that's a perfect example of it. And it's interesting too. And I've brought this up before, but there's that old wives' tale. It's like, oh, don't do that, or else you'll go blind. It's kind of true, because the thing is you're maybe not going to go visually blind, but you will go spiritually blind. And people will make excuses for their vices, excuses for their sins. And this is one of them. People will make excuses all the time. Oh, you're not being sex positive. You're slut shaming. You're doing all this kind of stuff. Like let people enjoy things. No, no. If you love somebody, you want to make sure that they don't go to hell. That's really what it comes down to. If you really love somebody, they say, love your enemy, love your neighbor. Yeah. I don't want them to go to hell. Oh, you can't judge somebody. You know, God, Jesus said to not judge. Can we parse that a bit? I mean, yeah, you know, he does say, you know, you don't complain about your neighbor's speck in his eye when you got a mote or a log in your eye. And it's like, yeah, I get that. You want to go in on that, but you still don't want to let your friend go to hell. Yeah. That's really what it comes down to. You just don't want your friends to go to hell, and you don't want your enemies to go to hell either. You know, that's a tough one. That's just almost up there with forgiving your abusive parents. But like, you know, I've said to people before, it's like, I got to pray for for Justin Trudeau. Why would you pray for Justin Trudeau? Well, imagine that guy had a baby face turn. Imagine that guy had a click in his conscience and all of a sudden started to realize the evil that he was purveying, the evil that he was spreading. You know, this is a man who legalized euthanasia. This is a man who has basically made it illegal to be realistic about biological sexes. This is a man who has twisted everything. He's also a man who got fired in the middle of a school year at West Point Grey Academy in the weirdest way. And there are news stories out there, if you look hard enough, that find that he also dealt with an NDA and potentially a hush money settlement to an underage student. And so we're looking at these things and we're going, man, you know, like, if you can stop a monster from being a monster, that's a good thing. Like, that's a really good thing. And so that's my logic when I look into it and I go, yeah, I'm going to pray for my enemies because I don't even want them to go to hell. That's what it means to love God. That's what charity means. You know, charity is not just like, you know, when they say, you know, love thy neighbor, it's not like I got to go over there and hold their hand and watch a romantic comedy. You know, it means I want them to, because God doesn't want to lose that soul. And so you
want the greatest good for them possible, which is God himself in heaven. That's what love is willing that, which is, you know, the best thing for the other person. And that's where we confuse, you know, this compassion with love, that we're afraid to call people out who are doing evil things because we might hurt their feelings. That's a false compassion. That's not love, right? Like one of the
it's also effeminate. It's effeminate to not tell them.
It's easier. Yeah. It's more comfortable to get along with people, to have that temporary sense of peace in the relationship rather than, you know, I tell my kids, I'm like, you want friends who are going to challenge you. You don't want friends who are going to agree with everything you say.
No, exactly.
And of course, being rich and wealthy, you surround yourself with sycophants very, very quickly. You get yes men, you get people who will not challenge your decision making. And it's so because you don't have that natural feedback loop of people criticizing what you're doing, warning you about the risks. You again lose a sense of reality on what you're doing, how evil it is.
Well, it speaks to pride too. I mean, you know, like, so pride is an inflated estimation of oneself, and it is also something where I know better than God. That's really what you're saying. You know, I mean, the first sin was pride when Lucifer said, "I will not serve," right? And not, and so you know, surrounding yourself with sycophants, it really plays into narcissism. And you want that feedback. And what's interesting about diabolical narcissism or just even temporal narcissism is it's a self-hatred masked with a false self-love. Yeah. And so they go deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole, chasing that dragon's tail, looking for that next high, looking for that next thing that says to them, no, you're okay. You don't have to change a thing. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. I mean, I looked at the response from Vince McMahon, and it was typical. He denies it. He's going to.
He denied any intentional wrongdoing. Yeah.
He's good at his words. He was probably coached on that one, right? Because it's clear he wronged her. And I've seen some pretty harsh takes where people are like, well, she's just looking for money and she just wanted her money. It's like, No, there's a missing justice here. Money doesn't cover justice.
And there is a very likely possibility that, you know, she cooperated with it, enjoyed the money, and went along with it for a while, and then, but I don't know what was going on behind closed doors. But all the same, the abuse of power, authority, and money and wealth has magnified this scandal, this deviancy by quite a bit.
Well, it was laced with threats right from the get-go.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, like he was telling her right away, like, if I need to shut somebody down, I shut somebody down. And I got the legal power to do it. I mean, the guy put her into the legal department at first. Like literally put her into the legal department at first. Like, that's brazen. That's really brazen. But at the same time, it's like, you know, this is a person who's being groomed, who's been manipulated, you know, right from the get-go. Yeah. But this is the thing too. And it goes back to fatherhood. A good father would have warned her about these kind of predators.
Mm-hmm.
And if he didn't, if there are good fathers listening to this show or catching the replay, you got to teach your daughters that billionaire who seems to take a liking to you, who likes your ideas and wants to make sure you have a career and all that kind of stuff like that. It's a mirage.
Yeah.
It's a mirage. He doesn't care. I dealt with this in Vancouver all the time. When I was in Vancouver, a lot of my clients, publicly traded companies, and every one of them had a very attractive woman at the front desk who, you know, if I had to go and pick up my checks, at a desk in Vancouver, it was rough, man. Because the thing is, like, you're standing up here, she's sitting down here. Generally speaking, she's wearing something low cut, so you got cleavage in your face. She's going to do all this other stuff. She knows what she's doing. Unfortunately, she's been taught wrong. This is the way that it's going to go. You got to avert your eyes, but if you're averting your eyes too much, you come across as a creep. But I don't care. I don't care if you don't like that. I don't want to look. If I have to take custody of my eyes, I don't care. I don't care. I respect my mother. I respect my sister. I respect my daughter. I respect my wife enough that I'm not going to go down that route. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm purity spiraling, which I've been accused of quite accurately a few times in the past, but it's true. This is what we are not teaching our daughters properly. I mean, there are these women that are going in there getting told by their mothers, you got to put it out there. That's how you're going to succeed. That's how you're going to find a husband. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You'll find a husband. All right. But it's going to be a Vince McMahon type husband.
Yeah.
You know,
well, it's similar. I've talked to guys who are like, I can't find a good woman, you know, and they find women that they find attractive physically, but they're like, yeah, but they're all crazy. And I said, well, where are you looking? They're like, well, you know, I go to the club, I go to the bar. And I said, have you ever tried taking a cooking class or going to church?
Yeah.
And just
I always tell people go to church.
What type of quality of woman with morals with that you would find, right? That's where, you know, again, that's that effeminate man trying to find women who will give what they want easily. I mean, it's also a lie of feminism that they can take ownership of their sexuality without consequence. Well, of course we have consequences, and unfortunately babies pay for that consequence of enjoying the pleasure of the act with their lives.
Yeah.
And the people involved in this will pay sometimes with ruined relationships, ruined sense of self, ruined, you know, even physically, they get STDs. There's all these different consequences that come into this from choosing the pleasure without the consequence. And the consequences will creep through. And, you know, like you were saying, you know, blessed be the poor. There's a blessing God gives to the poor in the sense that you don't have the opportunity to let your vices take over. I tried explaining this to my kids because, you know, growing up in Canada, we have a pretty comfortable life considering when you compare to people who have lived through all of history. We're in the minority of a comfortable life. And you don't have to work for your survival. So your problems have to do with your comforts and being, you know, you have to go to the store to pick up some milk and you don't want to because you're tired. Well, that's not a survival problem. That's a comfort problem. But
True.
You don't have to go out and milk the cow because the whole family is relying on that for their food for the next, few days. That's a different problem. That's a survival problem. So the intensity of the consequences helps you stay virtuous, helps you stay on track, helps you do what is right, even though it's not pleasurable all the time.
Well, that was part of the fall, right? So part of the fall was that Adam had to work by the sweat of his back, he had to work. We can't avoid work. I mean, people who avoid work and are wealthy and, basically make money off of things like usury, they're going to be inherently miserable because deep down, they know they're contributing nothing. They know that they're a parasite on the society because they're not making things. They're just taking things, or they're making other people do their work for them.
And they're devaluing everyone else's work.
Totally they are. Totally they are. And so the thing is that, going back to Vince McMahon and how do we prevent this? I don't know. I don't know, because the thing is unfortunately, he has shown in his actions that he has demonstrated. I'm looking for the word, sociopathy, narcissism, and in a form, psychopathy. And unfortunately, like in the song that I played at the beginning is Stand Back. He, the whole thing, he wrote those lyrics, and the whole thing is just this vindictive, vile thing. He's like, telling about how you step up to me, I'm going to crush you. I'm going to do all this kind of stuff. And it's like, yeah, that's in his heart. That's the way he's operating. And we are currently in a system that I want to say rewards temporally psychopathy. We are led by psychopaths. We are ruled by psychopaths. In a lot of ways, we are owned by psychopaths. Psychopaths will promote other psychopaths because going back to the Epstein stuff, these people use blackmail because they themselves have been blackmailed. And so it's like, okay, it's like, if you want to become in a biker gang, like the Hells Angels or something, one of the first things they make you do is commit a murder in front of another member, so that they can see that you've murdered somebody. And it has to be somebody completely random. And the reason why they do that is because they know that they had to do that to get into the group before. So the guy who's with you has killed someone. This is also their way of preventing, let's say, undercover police officers from getting in or something like that. And some of them still find their way in, but this is their protection mechanism. It's evil protecting evil. Yeah. And so if you look at the way that Vince McMahon did it, the first thing he did when he got back on the board is he rehired all of his protectors, all of the guys all the guys and gals that were completely behind him and protecting him. And I hope there's an investigation on that. I hope that they basically look at the guilt by association and go, okay, where there's smoke, there's fire. Let's take a look. And let's see where this went. And, we will see that over time, but, justice is God's. It's not ours. It's God's. Justice is for God. And so even though it's super disheartening, in some ways demoralizing to have these types of people get away with their most depraved activities, it seems like they get away with it, but they don't. In the end, they don't. No. It might seem like it, but they don't. Didn't we just have Henry Kissinger die? Just recently, we had Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and these people, they know now. They know now, and
our job is, if they pop into your head, say a prayer for them for mercy on them. But at the same time, how do we fix this? Well, it's each individual. We forget the power we have as individuals. One, choose your entertainment wisely. If no one's watching it, no one's going to make it.
Yep.
After a while, right? Choose your, in the workplace, be a stand-up person, even if it means taking that risk of, like if something corrupt is happening at work, being silent means being complicit.
I have a personal experience with that. My father and I were both let go on the same day from the company that we were working for, and it was because my dad was an honest player and did things honestly. I mean, he had a situation with a powerful group that our company was dealing with, and we had to open up our file room, and he let them know that we were doing that because we had to do that. It was a moral thing to do. I mean, because they were attached to those files, and they took offense to that at first, and we got fired for basically doing what was right.
Yeah.
And in the end, it doesn't seem just at the time, but we learn, and I stand by that 100%. What my dad did, 100%. What I did, 100%. I can hang my head high. And the people that were involved with wanting to push a deception, they'll learn. They'll get it eventually. And if they didn't get it then, they'll get it soon. And you hope that they turn around on those kind of things, because the thing is that we, again, it goes back to effeminacy, right? You got to do what is right, not what is, and what it might be hard. What might be going back to the, you are a man who lost his job because of standing up for your beliefs. You lost your job for not, if you don't mind me saying so, you
fine.
Lost your job for not taking the jab.
I didn't take the jab, and I was mocked and bullied, and there's a lot of things that happened. But I refused to take it. Eventually, I was let go, and I was really upset. I was really worried. It was at the height of all the COVID stuff, and I'm like, well, how am I going to find another job? Mm-hmm. Looking back, I feel silly because God really took care of me beyond what I could have expected. Yeah. But one of the interesting things was I had one of the guys who let me go. He called me up months later, well, close to a year later, and he wanted to apologize. And he said, I never want to do anything like that again or be involved in anything like that again. And so that, I thank God for that. Because there was something to that. And I knew I couldn't live with myself if I had taken it, knowing what I knew. And I knew that if I fell for this, then I'd fall for anything.
Well, that was quite a test on everybody. Yeah. And most people failed. Yeah. Unfortunately.
And I get it. I get the fear, and I get why some people did it even not wanting to. And I don't hold judgment against them. I just think, unfortunately they have to live with that choice. And that's just the way it is. And I don't think it makes you a terrible person, but I also understand now more than ever, the power of one person standing up. When you read, the Gulag Archipelago, and just the power that one person has by not cooperating with what's going on around them. The true freedom you have, say of Saint Maximilian Kolbe, they couldn't take that true freedom to love and serve God, even in a starvation chamber. He was totally free, even in that situation. And that's way more extreme than anything I faced. But it just really brought about, that when you have things taken away from you and you're choosing to follow God instead, that God rewards that in a different way. It also really helped me realize that all the work that I put into, building my career and building my relationship with this company and moving up in there, it really wasn't worth that much compared to what my soul, the value of my soul and taking care of the soul God gave me, that I have stewardship over. That was the big difference. And I think that, with this topic, you have so many distractions if you're wealthy, if you're powerful, that distract you from what's actually important. You put the value of the wealth, the value of the power over the value of your own soul. But as our Lord said, like what does it gain a man to sell, to gain the world and sell his soul, or in that Man for All Seasons, what does it gain a man to sell, gain the world and sell his soul, but for whales? It's so important. And our Lord also says, it's easier for a camel to go through the head of a needle than to get into the gates of heaven. It's one of those things where you realize being poor is a true blessing in this world, because this world isn't our home. We're just traveling through.
We're passengers on a
God
journey.
Very quickly is handling the consequences of sin. When you actually think about it, compared to eternity, 6,000 years of dealing with the consequences of sin and having a resolution to it built into it, and then a way to get into heaven. 1,000,000 years into heaven, God willing, we'll be sitting around saying, hey, remember when, we were sitting back here?
I hope I forget.
That important. Yeah.
Yeah.
It won't seem that important what we're doing in this world 1,000,000 years into heaven. And it really gives perspective.
This has been an awesome conversation, and I look forward to having you on many more times. And we should probably wrap this one up for this round. But yeah, man, I'm gonna love having you back on, Mr. Black. You're more than welcome back onto the program. It's good to be back. As you can see behind me, I've got a new office. You can probably hear the echoing in it because it's still pretty empty so far. But I am hoping to get back on track here. I had to take some time off during the break there. We were finishing the office, and I set up Starlink with Elon, and it was supposed to make everything better. But here I am using my data on my SIM card again because apparently it's overheated, and that's going to be a problem in Paraguay. But my hope is that we can get back on this thing rolling. And I want to thank you again for coming on. This has been High Trust, Low Context. I'm El Chaco. Thank you again to Mr. Black, and Viva Cristo Rey.
Amen.